Sophomore slump, not in Winnipeg. Game 2, a triumphant win for the Winnipeg Jets 2-1, but at 5v5, this was a lot more lopsided than the score line looks. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, the Jets just finished a huge game against the Blues. Game number 2, the last home game of this opening stretch for the Jets. And what a game it was. Winnipeg did kind of start out very similarly to Game 1, where the Jets' puck management wasn't super clean. I think the Blues have come out in both of these games really swinging from puck drop because they know that if they fall behind early, they really don't have much of a chance. The Blues, I think, understand the moment because they've been through this before. And this team also knows that they are the underdogs in this series. You know, regardless of how good they were getting into the postseason, regardless of where they finished, and, you know, some of the really great improvements to the team under the surface, this team still doesn't quite have the horses yet to be a really top-end contender, but they're getting there, right? I think that they are showing some signs of some real growth, but at this stage, you know, compared to what the Jets are putting together, they are still a little bit immature in that sense, right? And it's a little strange to say that because it's not like they're rebuilding in the usual sense. They've kind of done a retool on the fly, but coming into the series, they knew that they could not fall behind, right? It's just not a thing. And even with a lead, you know, St. Louis hasn't been able to hold it. The Jets have come back multiple times already and proven that they are the more experienced, better team, especially in this moment. And so, you know, I think the Blues have immediately come out with a lot of pressure, a really heavy forecheck, and they tried to set the tempo early. That didn't work again. You know, St. Louis has really had to live basically off of power plays and hoping that the Jets make mistakes. And Winnipeg did make a couple of really big ones early where there were some very clear high danger chances in the slot that Hellebuyck had to swallow. But other than that, you know, once the Jets started settling in, and really especially once the third period kicked in, Winnipeg kind of just went back to locking it down. You know, you saw the third period Jets, and for like 2 straight games, they have been almost unbeatable in those last 20 minutes. The second periods, I think, have shown some real improvement as the Jets basically just wear down St. Louis. And over time, you know, the Blues start making more mistakes. They start taking more penalties. And Winnipeg has generally been able to really just stifle whatever it is the Blues want to do, especially at 5v5. If you look at the underlying metrics, it has been a very one-sided first 2 games. Montgomery did say something like the Jets made one more play than the Blues did, and if you look at the scoreline, you might think that that's an accurate summation. But anyone who's actually watched these games and seen how the Jets have really defended well and how they have generally been the ones to create more opportunities, it's not really shocking that the Jets are up 2-0 in the series. This is a big deal for Winnipeg, especially because there was so much pressure coming into this postseason run. You know, our own hype has really put a big amount of expectation on it as fans, but also for the players. You know, they've talked endlessly about trying to atone for, you know, the previous mistakes, trying to go deeper and get better internally to make that push for a deep postseason run a reality. Well, let me tell you, if Game 2 is anything to go by, Winnipeg is already battle-tested, and they are ready for really finishing off this series and trying to just stay healthy in time for what will be a very likely matchup against the Colorado Avalanche in round 2. That said, they're still not going to overlook things, right? And, you know, games 3 and 4 in St. Louis, there's a really good chance the Blues win at least one of those games. I would be shocked if it's a sweep. It'd be awesome if it was. But I think there's also a part of me that does kind of hope that the Jets maybe get one more game in just in case they can work Vilardi back in, get him some real game time, at least in some sort of a depth role before they go into the Avs series. Obviously, that's going to be a really tough one. And again, this is assuming Colorado is the one that emerges in that one. But based on what we're seeing in the current game two, right now the Avs do have the 3-2 lead on the road in the third period. They seem like they are on the verge of going up 2-0 unless Dallas cuts it short. But, for the Jets, they're not too worried about that. Right now, they're still focused on the Blues. And so far, they have really taken care of business. In this game, I think what, really stood out was, again, the top line just doing top line things. The CSI line, as we've started calling them, have been just transformative for this team. They kick so much butt that it makes the depth line matchups a lot more manageable. And so Winnipeg has basically been able to roll 4 lines. The only line that I think they maybe underutilize actually is that fourth line. I would actually love to get them some more ice time, put them out there a bit more often, get them some more late game shifts. They are too good to not use, especially when your opponents are tired. So that could be something to keep an eye out for. But Stanley Shen, we've talked a lot about that pairing. Logan actually used his body really effectively in this game. There was one hit on Kyrou that I think was a little risky just because he did that, that pinch thing along the wall where you already have a Jets forward up. So he also kind of collided in that whole pile, and it did leave Bolduc open for, a bit of a cross seam pass. Hellebuyck handled it, though, not too big of a deal. I think the bigger thing was that Stanley absolutely leveled Kyrou. And in a series like this, if you hit one of their top players, and he did it multiple times in the game, that can really wear down a squad like the Blues that don't quite have the same amount of skill depth to cope, especially if their top guys start getting tired. So in that respect, it seems like it's a reasonable trade-off. He was also just a bit of a wrecking ball elsewhere. He did have a couple of turnovers that were probably, not your favorite, but overall, I thought if he's going to be out there, right, this is the kind of physicality that you want to see him use. He doesn't often make the best use of his strength. This was a game where that was not the case. He was decking dudes, and so was Shen. So, good solid night for what they're asked to do. Morrissey and DeMello, I thought, had a pretty strong game. DeMello, did have a turnover or two that he'd probably like back, but again, that kind of came earlier in the game with some of the poor puck management. Sandberg, I think, was really the standout blue line guy. He was just denying so many zone entries. He was, an absolute rock along the walls. Anytime anyone tried to get in on the right side, he absolutely would not let them through. So really impressive body positioning from him. He used the strength and skating to get the puck back up the ice quickly. Monster game from him, especially after a tougher one where the first game things were a little more scrambly. Elsewhere, I thought Perfetti had a nice game himself. Cole did chip in the game-winning assist. It was a bit of an in-between line change, but the top line handing it over to the second line, and Perfetti kind of played the role of Iafallo, found Kyle Connor right in the slot, and it was absolute pay dirt. Quietly, Hellebuyck also having a big rebound game. I don't even think the first game from him was really that bad. I know the save percentage looks low. He just didn't have that much work, and the Jets' PK in the first game was dreadful. It wasn't great in the second game, but I will say the last couple of PKs for Winnipeg actually looked a lot stronger. So very happy about that. Good to see. And for the Jets, this was a fantastic performance overall. Very happy. Just a huge win. Now the Jets have an easier road to potentially finishing this series a bit earlier, and they can take, hopefully, at least one of the next games in St. Louis. But, of course, that'll be later this week and weekend. Until then, we still have tons of playoff action, tons of stuff to chat about. And one thing that I thought would be worth maybe giving some thought to is Arnie's Army, right? There have been some comments online about where this version of Scheifele has come from, why Winnipeg is playing at this level. I want to talk about the coaching staff's impact here because I think Arniel, this is where I give him a ton of credit, and I want to talk about that in just a brief second. But before we dive into that, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. They're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. I'm somebody who likes the shelled variety, cracking open a nut and, getting a great little taste and, something that's packed with protein, always enjoyable. Maybe it's just because I'm from Maryland and so we're used to cracking open crabs, but maybe you don't have the same amount of time. Maybe you just want something that's a grab and go, whether you're dropping the kids off at school, need an afternoon pick me up from work, whatever it is. Wonderful Pistachios is there for you, including the no shelled variety, and they come in some great flavors that are always delicious. And of course, Wonderful Pistachios are a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. If you're ready to get started, get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about some very interesting things. Obviously, for Winnipeg, huge Game 2 victory, and for the Jets, this is really a commanding series lead. But amidst all of this, I've seen some interesting comments from folks outside Winnipeg and really from the Jets, or actually in this case, non-Jets media, asking, where something like Mark Scheifele becoming this dominant player came from, right? I think that there's been a lot of surprise at how the Jets have played. And, in some ways, for all of us who have watched this team, especially for the past couple of months, how Winnipeg has handled this series, especially at 5v5, really isn't that shocking. In fact, I think, there's been really just a continuation of some bigger trends that have been emerging the past couple of months, especially towards the end of the season. And what we've seen in the first couple of games against St. Louis really isn't that different from what we saw, in the latter stages of the regular season. I think one of the biggest things this year that has been really noticeable, and it's not just Mark Scheifele that's had this. Kyle Connor has, Al Iafallo has, Dylan Sandberg has kind of continued this trend. This team is probably ready to skate through a brick wall. Now, I think under, Rick Bowness, there was quite a bit of buy-in, right? And in a lot of ways, that had a really profound stage-setting moment for what this Jets team is now. Bowness kind of laid the groundwork for better relationships and improved locker room cohesion and chemistry. But now we're really seeing Arniel, taking those lessons and adapting them to some stylistic changes, right? Scheifele has been super engaged, and you don't even just see it in sort of the ability for him to score. He's, aggressively forechecking, diving into the corners. Tonight, he really sped towards the goal crease and actually leveled Binnington on a net drive. It's just the kind of stuff that he really, for a long time, wasn't doing. And there were previous seasons where he just looked like he did not give a crap. Not that he wasn't gonna get, get out there and play his game, but the body language, the way that he maybe didn't defend, the less engaged motion of his positioning and stuff, you can just kind of tell when Scheifele wasn't really feeling it. And it's not surprising. It's hard to blame him. If I was kind of on a team that was kind of stuck spinning its wheels for years and there were huge, locker room and leadership disagreements, I can't say that I'd react all that differently. So I get it from that perspective. But let me tell you, Scheifele, I think, has really stepped up his game in a way that, this is the kind of top line, first line center performance that, a lot of us have said we didn't think he'd return to. There have been many words said about whether Scheifele is a top line elite center on a contender. This version of him, there is like zero question. This guy is ready to basically grab this team by the scruff of its neck and take it to a Stanley Cup run. So if this is the version of Scheifele that Arniel has teased out, let me tell you, that sort of buy-in and commitment is something that really transcends just basic tactical awareness. This is just a really big thing, culturally speaking, and for the org as a whole. And it's not just Scheifele. Kyle Connor is back checking and playing his best hockey of his career. Iafallo has had a career season now where he continues to really be this versatile middle to top six player, and he's really helped that top line emerge. You're seeing, some defenders really put themselves up there. Sandberg having an incredible year. Who else? I think Lowry has really generally had a pretty strong season. Morgan Barron suddenly resurgent as a center again. Cole Perfetti really emerging as an elite top 6 wing out there. Such a great forechecker, such a complete game. And despite his skating, just continues to find ways to be a really positive player, especially for the kind of playoff hockey that we are now seeing. So I am quite happy. Everything looks to be coming up Jets. Very impressed with Winnipeg. And, for the foreseeable future, this team, I really feel, has bought into what Arniel is preaching. And that, I think is a really valuable thing. I've had lineup disagreements with Scott before, and, I certainly have certain questions about maybe the amount that he kind of loves Logan Stanley a bit. He does have some, a couple of interesting blind spots. Maybe the lack of love for David Gustafsson I find very interesting because, I thought Gus would be a player he'd adore. Perhaps not as much as I expected, but in so many other ways, I often say with NHL coaches, you have to find the guy whose good outweighs any of his idiosyncrasies. And with Arniel, I really feel like we're getting an increasingly impressive performance from him where, yes, he will do some things that naturally, some of us may raise a few eyebrows to, but the net good that he continues to offer this team and the amount that he has really won the squad over and really commanded the respect of the team, I think is an extremely positive direction. So, I've really hoped that this year would have him kind of become the guy that, we've really been waiting for several years now. And it's starting to feel like maybe that is finally coming to pass. This really is starting to kind of feel like we are seeing Arnie's army in starker relief. And so, yeah, I just feel like this team is playing some of the best hockey it's played all year. In these first couple of games, we've seen the Jets really lock down St. Louis. And all I can say is, here you had a really potentially serious situation with a number of key injuries to some of your top 6 forwards. You've dealt with Sandberg being out at one point this year. You've had other players, including Pionk, missing time. And yet the Jets have really continued to, for the most part, play at a level that I think is really inspiring. And, this team, for whatever faults it may have, at the end of the day, I think the Jets really do deserve this deep playoff run. It's been a great early ride, and I just hope that it continues for a long time yet. And speaking of some of those injuries, of course, the Jets are actually due to get some guys back. The exact timing is still unclear. Ehlers will not be back this round. It does seem like it would be a second round appearance if the Jets are still in by then. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to lock that one in. I say he will be playing more playoff hockey for the Jets this year. It's really just a question of when, but I feel pretty good about Winnipeg making it that far. Vilardi does seem to be back sometime in the near future. Depending on how long the series against the Blues goes, he could be back maybe game 5, game 6. I heard somebody on one of the broadcasts say maybe game 4. My feeling is that if the Jets are in control of the first game or two and they take maybe even game 3, I just don't really see a reason for them to rush Vilardi back because, the amount of injuries or injury risk that he has with his, health and everything, you just don't really need to be too aggressive here. Against Colorado, maybe a bit of a different story, but with the Blues, how the Jets have played as is right now, missing both Ehlers and Vilardi, you're not really feeling too stressed about shoving either of these guys back in the lineup before they're really ready to go. So very impressed. I think that, the Jets are really sitting pretty with their current positioning and how they have already gotten themselves a couple of huge wins in this series. And all of that kind of leads me to some really interesting questions coming up with it over the next couple of weeks. Assuming the Jets get through this first round relatively drama-free, injury-free, and assuming they start getting some guys back, how is Arniel going to do these lines? Because I look at the CSI line and I'm like, I, for the life of me, can't imagine breaking it up now, which I can't believe I'm saying because I never thought CSI would be this good. But here we are. I mean, they have been instrumental and really the straw that stirs the drink. It's also been noticeable that the Jets' depth scoring hasn't been as impactful. And so that's where I really think getting some reinforcements back could be an absolute game changer for this top 9. I want to chat about that in just a brief little bit and talk about, maybe some ways that the Jets can get this team even more depth internally in just a brief second. But before we dive into those sorts of improvements, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. FanDuel makes betting super easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player propositions. They track everything from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel can help you win in tons of different ways, and if you're watching a game, even if it's already tipped off, be sure to combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win even bigger. This also applies for the NHL, so as the Jets continue to go deeper, you can also pile up the victories, and you can only do that by heading to FanDuel.com to claim your $250 in bonus bets right now. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts tonight, as we are just chatting about some really interesting questions. The Jets have honestly been so good at 5v5 against the Blues that, you start to wonder, how do you rearrange this top nine when everyone's healthy? Ehlers, that's not really going to be a question until the second round, but with Vilardi potentially coming back sometime in the next few games, for me, I know where Arnie tends to go, right? He tends to do his same original lines. I hope he doesn't. For once, I feel like we found a non-Ehlers, Scheifele, Vilardi top line that is cooking to a degree that I didn't imagine was possible. Connor, Scheifele, and Iafallo together have been just unbelievable. This trio, I think, has really set the tone and set the pace with a strong forecheck, great space creation, even when they've been a little bit frustrated with some moments where maybe the Blues have kind of blocked them out a bit. They just keep diving in and keep chipping away at it until they find something that works. And in multiple moments in these first couple of games already, they have either tied or set, a game winner in place. So this is, for me, a line that has really led the way. And while the Jets' bottom lines have kind of struggled to maybe find the score sheet a bit more, this top line has really carried the effort. And so where my mind goes is the middle six is your next, port of call, right? You're about to get Gabriel Vilardi back. Vilardi's biggest impact for me immediately is going to be on the power play, right? Him coming back on your man advantage is going to give the Jets a huge boost, especially down low. At 5v5, I think I want to see him on a line with a big forecheck, right? I would like to see him play alongside a Lowry or something. I kind of feel like because his game when he's on the puck is a little less physical, it's not quite as strong and as persistent as maybe an Iafallo. Maybe you put him on a line with a guy like Lowry and Niederreiter who do that work, right? And it's not like Vilardi is a soft player. He's not. It's just, I think when he's under pressure, he's not quite as in control, right? His best thing is when he's in space and can start to really, drive towards the net in possession. And I think that's where having guys who are really strong and really bulldoze their way towards goal is especially helpful. That's for me the big ticket to getting him going. And I think it would also add a lethal finishing element to maybe the Lowry line that's really been kind of looking for that. Appleton, hasn't really been able to get things going. He's had a couple of moments where he's just been straight up robbed, but maybe having somebody with that extra little bit of lethality and attention-grabbing skill could be a difference maker for that trio. With Ehlers, I guess you can just put him back with Perfetti and Nemestikov. For me, I personally feel like there are perhaps better ways to make that work, but like that line is fine. The only thing you just have to keep an eye out for is if they start getting hemmed in defensively. But I mean, Ehlers and Perfetti have been good together, and I know that they do tend to see Vlad as like your 2C. So assuming that trio stays together, I don't really mind that as like another secondary line. I think the biggest thing is figuring out how to keep CSI together. You do that, and at that point, everything else probably just starts to filter down into other positions and roles. It will probably mean that some players I like are in danger of getting benched. I think Jarrett Anderson-Dolan has really staked a claim to his potential spot. But for me, I think the bigger one is Gustafsson, right? Gus has been such a great presence in the two-way game and on the forecheck. And I think he'll probably be one of the first guys to be on the chopping block in terms of the starting lineup. But that's kind of the benefit of having this sort of forward depth is, when you've got lots of guys who can reasonably slot into your bottom six and really thrive, that means that some good names are going to be left off. And, I think the Jets are more than flush with reserves. Kupari's coming back, it sounds like, pretty soon. So, for the Jets, this is a great position to be in. And, it's definitely an interesting challenge. But I think for me, the central question is, what is the response to keeping the top line together? My guess is Arniel will go back to CSV, and I hope that he doesn't, because I really feel like CSI has just done a ton more offensive zone work to a level to where it's almost impossible to ignore. I thought through some different potential line combinations. Before we get Ehlers back, maybe you try Perfetti, Lowry, and Vilardi. I doubt that he would do that for a lot of reasons. Then you'd have something like Niederreiter, Nemesnikov, and Appleton. But again, I don't really see that being a trio that he'd try. At best, you maybe get 91, 7, and 13. And I don't even know if it would work that well, to be honest. I think until we get Ehlers back, that middle six is going to be a little bit topsy-turvy. And you also have to remember that with Vilardi, because of his injury risks and stuff, I think it might not be the worst idea to shelter him just a bit, right? You can use him pretty freely on the power play, but maybe at 5v5, instead of throwing him back in immediately, just sort of ramp him up. It's been a while since he's played. It's the playoffs. There's, additional pressure. And the Jets are playing so well that there's not really a rush to throw him back into 18, 20 minutes a night worth of hockey. So you can balance it out a little more carefully. You don't have to throw him into the deep end, which I think is a really big advantage for this Jets team. I think it's a huge secret weapon for Winnipeg, and I am very hopeful to see how Arniel kind of approaches getting these guys integrated again, how he puts them back in, and if he really does decide to keep Connor Scheifele and Iafallo. For my money, I am kind of hoping that the evidence is really clear to him that this is maybe the best way to do it. So curious to know your thoughts. How would you assemble the lines? Drop your predictions or suggestions in the comments below, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow we'll have an update on some of the other series and where we're at with some of those games, as well as a preview of Winnipeg versus St. Louis coming up. But for tonight's show, again, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We will see you back here tomorrow for even more Jets coverage, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets, go.